Hello and welcome to Cymera, Britain's only book festival celebrating science fiction, fantasy and horror writing. My name is Anne Landman and I'm the festival's founder and artistic director. Right about now, I'd hope to be welcoming you to beautiful Edinburgh, to our venue The Pleasance, for a weekend packed with events. Writing workshop, panels, readings, open mics, a quiz, a ceilidh, 2 plays. We had so much in store for you. Thank you for joining us online instead, to be part of our programme from the safety of your homes. We're very excited to still bring you a fantastic lineup of speakers. We'd ask you that you support our speakers, and there's many ways you can do that. You can buy their books or borrow them from the library. You can donate to them directly via their Patreon or Ko-fi. You will find the links for that below in the description. We encourage you to buy a ticket for our events, even the pre-recorded ones. All ticket money will go directly to our speakers. You can also donate to the festival, and all donations via the donation page will be split between our speakers, once we've covered our costs like the Zoom account. Thank you again for joining us in this brave new world of digital events. We hope you have a chance to check out all 33 of ours over the weekend. Please let us know what you think of them. Do get in touch via social media, the chat function in Zoom, or drop us an email on info@chimerafestival.co.uk. We'd love to hear from you. We hope you have a fantastic weekend, and we look forward to seeing you in person next year for Cymera 2021.
So welcome to this Cymera 2020 event on this lovely, at least it's a lovely afternoon in Edinburgh. What a weekend weather we would have had if we were in person in Edinburgh, the Pleasance. Unlike last year when it was raining, today it's beautiful and sunny. Although I bet you if we actually had gone ahead with the festival, it would still be raining. Because, you know, that's how this works. So thank you for joining us here online. Before we get to the main event, which is Kat Dunn and Kiran Hargrave talking to Eleanor Pender about their fantastic YA novels, we have a little taster, an aperitif for you, because we're very international. And it is a Brave New Words reading by Daniel Allison. Brave New Words is a campaign we run to support emerging writers right here in Scotland. And they are invited to read a short extract from a new piece of work. So Daniel Allison is a Scottish author and oral storyteller. He has travelled and performed throughout the world, from Peru to Uganda to Nepal. But today, he is joining us here online. Daniel will be reading an extract from his novel, The Bone Flute, which is his debut fantasy novel. So please put your hands together wherever you may be and welcome Daniel Allison.
Hey everyone, so this is The Bone Flute. And I'm going to read you the first chapter, which comes in just under 5 minutes, which is perfect. Chapter 1, Orkney, circa 500 BC. Talorc crawled through the forest of dune grass, listening to the stranger sing. He couldn't see the singer yet, but it had to be a stranger. No one he knew would steal out before dawn to sing up the sun, except Grunna, and she was dead. The wind was fierce this morning, its howling covering the sound of his approach. Talorc wanted to see the stranger, but he didn't want the stranger to see him. Why not? Because this was Oran, and no one ever came here except in Grunna's stories, about marauders from the sea who stole away women and murdered men, or about Finn men who came ashore at night to perform their secret spells. Talorc reached the dune's peak and looked down. Moonlight silvered the sand. Upon the sand stood the stranger. He wore a sealskin cloak and faced away from Talorc, north towards the sea, his arms spread wide as if he wished all the sea creatures and the hidden stars would listen. His voice was deep and grating, and his words made no sense. At his side was a skin sack, and beside it a heap of seagrass. The sack was moving. Talorc noticed this, but didn't dwell on it. Faint voices whispered in his mind as his gaze fixed on the scaled, blue-black skin on the stranger's hands, and his bare feet, and on the coiled tail resting between his legs on the sand. Talork knew that he knew almost nothing of the world. He knew his village, half a mile southeast of the beach. He knew the beach and the western cliffs where seabirds nested, and the rolling hills to the south and their scattered farmsteads. Not once had he been to the south of the island, nor to any other island in Orca, nor out to sea. But he knew Orca's stories. He knew about Finn men. This was a Finn man. The sack moved again. Something was alive inside it. The Finn man went on singing as he kicked it with the heel of his foot. Whatever was inside the sack whined and fell still. The Finn man ceased his rasping song. He walked around the sack, the hood of his cloak obscuring his face, and knelt over the mound of seagrass. Talork watched as his long, scaled fingers arranged it into the shape of an arrow, complete with flight feathers and barbed point. The arrow faced southeast, towards Talork, towards the village. The sky was brightening. Talork's family would be awake now, and at the harvesting soon. He would be in for another scalping. The Finn man now went to the sack. Was it really a Finn man? They were forbidden to leave their island, except to fish in the waters around it. Sometimes folk said they'd seen one out at sea, but only ever for a few moments, and there was never any proof. But only Finn men had tails and blue-black glittering scales. It had to be a Finn man, which meant that this was the most exciting thing that had ever happened to Talork. He had a story of his own to tell now. It also meant that he was in danger. For the Finn man was breaking the treaty, and if he knew Talork was there, Talork's thoughts were interrupted as the Finn man pulled from the sack a fat seal pup. He held it aloft as it struggled, wriggling as it keened for its mother in sharp yelps. The Finn man let it struggle while he resumed his song. And though Talork didn't understand his words, there was a feeling of finality to them, like the way Grunna had spoken when nearing the end of a story, or the way she'd played the last few notes of a tune on her bone flute. The white-furred, black-eyed pup seemed to sense it too, and writhed more desperately, keened more loudly. The Finn man lowered the pup to his chest, out of Talork's sight. Day had come. The sand shifted from silver to white in the faint approaching sunlight. The wind howled like a bone flute played by a giant in the sky. The Finn man reached into his skin cloak, withdrew a stone knife and held it up high. Talork's heart pounded as if trying to break free. The Finn man's song reached its peak. The final note resounded. The knife flashed down, flashed up again. Red blood poured from the pup onto the arrow as Talork screamed. The Finn man turned and looked straight at him. And that's chapter 1 of The Bone Flute. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, for reading that and sharing your story with us. Brave New Words is a brilliant scheme and a really strong part of what Cymera is about, and helping aspiring and emerging science fiction genre writers to share their work with a wider audience. So thank you for that. Welcome to our lovely audience, all lovely 25 of you joining me and my books on my bookshelf in my house. Welcome to my home, and the lovely Kat, Dunn, and Kiran, Millwood, Hargrave. I kept reading your name as Millgrave Harwood, and I don't know why. I'm guessing it happens. Oh, I'm not alone, but I will get it right. I was like, I have a lovely resource to help me get it right. This is Waterstone's limited edition as well. I was very proud I managed to get one. You signed it.
Ah, you got one of the not too
I did. I saw it. I'm like, I fell for the lovely sprayed edges there. So we'll just let our audience, I'm just going to let everyone know how the event is going to go. Welcome to Cymera Festival. Need to make a point of saying that this is the UK's only dedicated science fiction, fantasy and horror festival, because genre fiction is fab. That's my official line. My name is Eleanor, And it's absolutely brilliant to be chatting for the next 50 minutes with Kiran and with the lovely Kat Dunn. So I'm going to introduce our authors to you, especially for people who may not have read any of their books. Do mention in the chat box now if you have not read any of their works and you would like this session to be full spoiler free, which we are more than happy to do, but it's always good to gauge how many of our audience have actually read their work, because that will be very helpful. Of course, today's session will be specifically discussing Dangerous Remedy by Kat Dunn and The Deathless Girls. But there are obviously a few other books that Kiran has written. Kiran, it says here, your earliest ambition was to be a cat. but you own one now, so that's fine.
They're just there forever.
It's just there. It's on. Maybe, yeah, I don't know. She's like, oh, okay, thank you, Vandella. We will keep it spoiler free. Yeah, but you have a cat, so you know you were part of it there. But you became a writer, and that lets you imagine whatever you want. Your best-selling debut, The Girl of Ink and Stars, won the Waterstones Children's Book Prize 2017. Well done, you. And the British Book Awards Children's Book of the Year. Your second standalone story, The Island at the End of Everything, was shortlisted for the Blue Peter Award and the Costa Children's Book Award, and was longlisted for the Carnegie Medal. Very nice. Your third book, The Way Past Winter, was the Blackwell's Children's Book of the Year 2018, and The Deathless Girls, published in September 2019, was commissioned as part of the Hachette Children's Bellatrix series, and was shortlisted for the YA Book Prize. You're a very busy lady. Lots of books there.
And yeah, it's been good. It's been a lot, but good.
Yeah. And of course, your latest adult novel, your first book for adults, is that right? The Mercies, that came out earlier this year.
Yes, in February.
Out now, everyone. Debuted at #1 on the Times bestseller chart. So yeah, if anyone wants to make notes of those, we'll put a list. This biography is on the Cymera website, so all those books will be listed if you want to have a look at the event description. Kat Dunn, the lovely Kat, is in London. But you've also lived in many other places, including Japan, Australia, and France.
Yes.
Anywhere else you want to add to that list?
Not lived. I've been around.
Okay, you've been around. You have a BA in Japanese and MA in English. You've written about mental health for Mind and The Guardian, and you've worked as a translator for Japanese television.
Yes.
Your fiction has been shortlisted for the Dyslexia Novel Competition, and Dangerous Remedy is your debut novel. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
You're very welcome. It's a brilliant read, brilliant fun. Introduced our lovely authors. We've been asked to keep it spoiler free, which is very helpful. Welcome, both of you. How have you been?
Fine.
Fine. Yeah.
Can't complain.
Generally doing okay.
I would like a garden or a balcony. That's the thing I would like. Other than that, I'm fine. I can cope. So.
Yes. Seeing people's, when people weren't able to go outside, just like hanging out of windows. Is that?
Well, I had suspected coronavirus, and so I was in my house for like 3 weeks straight, and all I could do was put my feet out of a window where the sunshine hit, and I was just like, so now I can go outside, so that's great. I have no problems with this anymore.
Kiran, are you like, I have a garden, I'm very happy.
I didn't say that to be like, oh my God.
No, I'm just like, I'm incredibly lucky. Like, yeah, they're just incredibly lucky. So.
It's swings and roundabouts. I have no garden, but I have like 5 really nice shops that are still selling you coffee and cake and stuff within walking distance.
Yeah.
So
lovely. So let us get to our lovely books. So today's event is called Past Tensions. So let's go straight into the theme here. What drew you to explore these stories and how they relate to past tensions? Kat, would you like to go first?
Sure. Gosh. Well, so obviously I'm writing about the French Revolution. I really wanted to write YA's seen a lot of revolutions in fantasy worlds and all kinds of things, and I was really interested in writing about a revolution, but further down the line. So quite often we have lots of stories about overthrowing the tyrannical government or the monarchy. I kind of wanted to look at what happens when you've done that and you've got this perfect new world you wanted, and turns out it's not perfect and you still have loads of problems. And I mean, you know, you don't need me to tell you much that the French Revolution went a bit wonky and ended up in bloodshed and terror and things. So I was really drawn to that difficult period of, right, you've had this lovely principled stamp, now what? How do you do it practically? And I think that was a question that really drew me to the French Revolution period and what I wanted to talk about in Dangerous Remedy. And obviously right now, that's just I mean, I would say particularly right now, given the state of the world, but also it's always the question we have, which is like, it's great to have a principle, but how are you practically going to enact that and make it possible? And, you know, for those of us on the left, the accusation is always, oh, it's a nice idea, but how would it actually work? So that's an idea that drew me to that historical period.
Yeah, would you maybe set the scene a little bit as to how you start the book? So from the French Revolution and so just to not I don't know if you want to necessarily do a short reading right now, but how would you introduce the novel itself?
Gosh, how would I introduce the novel itself? I mean, it's I'll give you the basic pitch, because as I already chatted about with Anna this morning, it's very hard to talk about it without massive spoilers. But it's set in the French Revolution, but towards the end, as I mentioned. So it's 1794. Marie Antoinette and King Louis are dead. Robespierre is in charge. The terror is in full swing. There are guillotines everywhere. You're seeing thousands of deaths. And we join Camille and her band of rebels who they rescue people, innocent people, out from underneath the guillotine in a sort of Scarlet Pimpernel vibe, and they are set to go and rescue another girl. But when they go and find her, she is not an aristocrat, and she's not exactly human either. So then both the royalists who hired them to rescue her and the revolutionaries who had her locked up are like, hand her over then. And they're like, oh no, uh-oh, we've been lied to. What's the right thing to do here? So that's kind of the basic setup that you get in the very sort of start of the book. And then I just can't say anything else because it's a huge spoiler. So.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. I think, yeah, that paints a wonderful picture. And if you'd like to know what happens next, Kiran, would you introduce the Deathless Girls to us, please?
Of course. And just quickly on Dangerous Remedy, that is such a good setup, and it is so good. It's just as every bit as intriguing as it sounds. It honestly, I really loved the twists. I didn't see where it was taking me, and I love that. The Deathless Girls, in much the same way that Dangerous Remedy sort of comes after what we might suspect would be the natural climax in a book, mine actually comes before, so it's a prequel of sorts. So it follows two sisters, Kizzy and Lil, and they are travellers, is their heritage. And one day they are enslaved by a lord, a boyar, who takes them to his castle, and they start this very harsh life in the castle kitchens. And whilst they're there, they start to hear whisperings about a mythical figure almost called the dragon. And the dragon, and this isn't a spoiler because it is an origin story. It says on the back of the book, it's an origin story for the brides of Dracula. So my issue when I was writing this book was how to keep that tension. When you know the ending, you know that ultimately these are the Dark Sisters, and you've probably read Bram Stoker's novel and you sort of know where they're going. But mine is about how you get there. How do you make the decisions that turn you into a monster? Literally in this case. So it's more interested, I suppose, if Kat's looking at consequences, I'm looking at sort of people setting up those actions that lead to those massive consequences.
Yeah, I have to say, I think I was a few chapters in before I was like, oh, I wonder what the inspiration was. And then helpfully you have authors notes at the back. I was like, oh, okay. So I kind of started it not knowing quite where it was headed. And I think, it did. There were, I kind of liked both sides of it because I was like, oh, I wonder where this is going, and it's got a really interesting take on that particular storyline. So just to let our audience know, you've been introduced to our wonderful writers and their works. If you do have any questions at any point, you are very welcome to add them to the Q&A section. So do direct you to the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, you're able to send your questions and submit them to all the panelists. So do select all panelists, and then myself, Kat, and Kiran will be able to see all of your questions. And then towards the end of the event, we will work our way through and be able to see if we can get through as many as possible. But before we get to that, we're going to have some lovely little readings, and we're also going to obviously have a lot of conversation because there's so much to talk about with both of these books. Kat, would you mind giving us a little reading of Dangerous Remedy?
Yeah, of course. So I'll read the first chapter, which you've already kind of heard the setup. So our gang are out to try and rescue Maria Lamp de l'Aubespine. So I will just start at the beginning. This is chapter 1. And it's in the sky above the Conciergerie prison, Paris, on the 15th of Prairial, year 2. A bullet ripped through the fabric of the hot air balloon, and Ada knew their whole plan had been a terrible mistake. Dangling high above the most notorious prison in Robespierre's Paris, her faith in the scientific forces holding them aloft seemed suddenly a lot more questionable. The job was simple. Rescue Lamp Marie de l'Aubespine, who was being held prisoner before being taken to the guillotine. The plan was anything but. Breaking someone out of the conciergerie had never been done before, so they'd needed to do something no one had ever tried. If we die, I'm going to kill you. Al clung to the wicker basket beside Ada, blonde hair whipping around his pale, pinched face as the hot air balloon lurched violently. Stomach in anxious knots, Ada yanked on several ropes and pulleys at once, sending them bobbing slantways over the rooftops. If you don't start helping, Al, I'll kill you first. She threw bag after bag of ballast over the side and watched them thunk onto the cobbles far below. Not far enough below for her liking. Streets and squares and parks unfurled beneath them, sprawling out from the prison like a spider's web. A muddy swirl of slate roofs and green treetops washed up against the brown ribbon of the Seine as it flowed through the centre. The river split around the Ile de la Cité, where the Notre Dame Cathedral dominated at one end. At the other lay the prison, among the complex of law courts and revolutionary headquarters. Above them, a broad summer sky yawned the cool eggshell blue of a half-hearted summer. The tear in the balloon flapped jauntily in the wind, huffing out precious hot air. Ada had thought they'd been too high up for the prison guards' musket fire to reach them. She'd been wrong. In the distance, she could just about see the Place de la Révolution, where the guillotine lay waiting. When the revolution had started 5 years ago, it had been called Place Louis XV, named for the previous king. There had been hope of building a new France, of finding a better, fairer way to rule. But the new government had floundered, and King Louis XVI had been executed in the same square. It had changed everything. It was as though France was a frustrated child, finally getting what it wanted, but finding the prize sour and disappointing. Without the king, people still starved. Inequality continued. The country splintered, and the different factions spat at each other like a serpent with many heads. In the middle of all of it, Ada, Al, and the rest of the Battalion of the Dead were the last port of call for anyone with a loved one in trouble, whatever side they were on, with the prison breaks their speciality. Ada loved the thrill of the chase, the flare of pride when the plan came off, but sometimes she knew they pushed their luck too far. The hiss of escaping air gave her the creeping fear that this was going to be the last mistake she ever made. "What do we do?" shrieked Al, peering over the edge at the crenellations of the prison that were rapidly rising to meet them. Ada rammed a hairpin back in place to secure the tight black curls that framed her brown face. She threw another couple of ballast bags overboard, giving a calculating glance to the ground to try and judge their rate of descent. Dread made her chest tight, but she was damned if she'd let Al see it. "I'm making us lighter," she explained. "It's a basic scientific principle. Hot air rises, we have lots of hot air above us, but only if we're lighter than the volume of air." "Are you mad? Air doesn't weigh anything." Al clutched at the ropes, face ashen. "I'm going to die because a madwoman thinks she can weigh air. Dead, disowned, and not even 18. Ada rolled her eyes. She yanked at the burner, sending a jet of flame soaring, praying the other members of the battalion were in place, ready to carry out their part of the plan. "Just throw the ballast overboard." The flame licked the drooping fabric, and it started to smoulder. Al watched it curiously. "Was that supposed to happen?" "No," she swallowed. "It really isn't." A rush of fire whooshed over the fabric, and the balloon began to disintegrate around them. Below, guards clustered on the prison roof, pointing and shouting. She wondered what they must look like to them. One pale face, one dark, hurtling down in a shower of flames like Lucifer falling from the heavens. Al grabbed her hand, naked panic in his eyes. The last of the balloon was swallowed up, and then they were free-falling into the most notorious prison in Paris. Well, they were supposed to create a distraction.
It's such a good start.
So good.
I was like, so it did work. Really, really good start. So the Battalion of the Dead, was it? You've got Camille, Ada, Jules, and Al. Yes. So they all have their own sense of protest. They're all there for their own different reasons, but they all kind of come together in their united desire to push back against all these other forces that are going on. Why did you feel it was important to have this need? I suppose in my question, I really kind of this need for them to it's a form of protest, but I suppose there's slightly more action that they're certainly undertaking. But why did you feel that it was to focus it in that particular way?
To give each of them their own kind of rebellion.
Yeah.
Do you know, it's not something I think I consciously chose to do. I think it was quite a natural thing for them. I guess the French Revolution is a time outside of time. It's a time when all of the social norms are upended, and it's possible to have a gang of young people come together and not be under the thumb of their parents, not need to necessarily work in a conventional sense. You know, society has just kind of been torn up. So it kind of made a lot of, it just felt very natural for them each to have done something to kind of step outside this kind of conventional world. So Camille is the daughter of revolutionaries who are labelled traitors and executed, so she's forced out of the world. Ada makes the choice to run away and join her. Guy is a deserter. He joined the Revolutionary Army full of belief in the revolutionary principles and left. Al has been forced out of his family for being gay. So there was kind of a reflection of the time period it's in, but it also felt very natural for them to embody that spirit of rebellion, either kind of being forced like Camille and Al, or to make a choice like Ada and Guy. And so I never even thought they wouldn't have their own. It's a really interesting question because I've never quite thought of it like that, but it seemed very natural for them to all have that personal stake in revolution and protest meaning something, and be willing to put their life on the line to save people from a version of the revolution they don't think is fulfilling the principles anymore.
Yeah, I just thought that was a really interesting way of looking at it. And Kiran, you can, I mean, the way that I, feel free to completely correct me if I'm wrong, but I did feel that Lil and Kissy, they also, they find themselves obviously in an incredibly difficult position with the what happens to them, as you previously mentioned earlier, and they too struggle with the the ability to stake who they are and where they're from, and balance that with the position they find themselves in, and that pushing back, but also how you do that. You have a very interesting way of being able to look at protest and pushing back, but also survival from a very different, very subtle different perspectives. And I wondered if you'd I suppose I wondered if you'd talk a little bit about that.
Yes, and definitely they, they're very different. They're twins, but they're very different. And Kizzy is very self-possessed. She knows who she is. She knows what she wants to be. And then she gets thrown into this position where she is powerless, but for the fact that she is beautiful. And we know that throughout history, being beautiful is a currency, and she chooses to wield her beauty like a weapon almost. She uses it as a way to elevate herself, and this has consequences, as anything does. If there's people only see one side of you, they put you in that box, and that in itself is dangerous. And then with Lil, she is still forming. At the beginning of the book, she is forming who she is. She doesn't know. She's her sister's shadow at the beginning of the book, and she doesn't do much more than trail after her. But of course, her interior world is far more complex and full of these yearnings that she'd never allow herself to voice. And in a weird way, while the enslavement is the clipping of Kizzy's wings, it turns out to be the making of Lil. And it's where she starts to really discover who she is, in terms of her sexuality, in terms of what she wants her future to look like. So it's, I suppose, the way that they react being so different. I'm always very interested. Horrible things happen in books. They, as a necessity of things have to happen, and horrible things happen at the beginning of this book. And I'm always interested in what after that. You know, people survive trauma, and what's more than that, they thrive and they can become, I'm not saying that trauma is a glamorizing thing in any way, it's awful, but you can go on and you can thrive and you can become stronger. So I'm always interested in people's responses to it. And there's always, you know, fight, flight, and there's also freeze. And I think that the three main female characters in this book, in a way, are my response to exploring each of those three things. You know, there's Mira as well, who is a slave girl who they meet at the palace. And I'll leave it to the reader to decide which one. But that was very much forefront in my mind was, you know, I always hated in a book where something massive happens and the characters, it just seems to be a plot device and the characters seem unaffected and they just go on. Whereas those things can have ripples and impacts forever, but it doesn't mean that you're a victim. So I was very interested in exploring that side of things as well.
Yes, and you do that brilliant. That's a very good point, actually, about how it's like there's the line when you're like, oh, I can't possibly process everything that's just happened to me, I must go on, and then they just carry on into the next bit of the book. Would you maybe do a little reading to paint the picture of the deathless girls for us? Thank you.
Certainly. I'll just read the little prologue that sets you up into the world. There is a time here called aftermath. After the settled have pulled their harvests from the ground and long bound and placed it in dark stores, shored against rats by cats starved in narrow houses where they fight and mate and sleep until they are loosed. After the turning seasons like the trees red gold in the cold, the ground hardening underfoot, wrinkling with frost. After the snow comes like a heavy, smothering blanket, pillowing the mountains and setting off the soft fury of avalanches, finding the cracks in rocks and splitting them easy as the seeds that are deeply furrowed in the stilled earth. After the melt and pivot of another year, after all this, comes the aftermath. The first, green moments of a new harvest, the emergence of the slow work happening beneath the thawing soil. For the settled, it is a heralding of the work to come, always the same, sure as seasons. For us, it is a time to move on. The aftermath had just started that year when the soldiers came through the narrow mountain paths, up through the coppery trees, and onto this land we lived upon, but laid no claim to. It was a beginning into which they arrived, bringing with them the end.
You have such a wonderful poetic way of writing and painting that picture. It is, I know it kind of made me almost slow down my reading. I had a few books to get through for Cymera, so it was a bit like, you know, just take your time. It was really nice. I asked Kat earlier about past tensions, and I'd like to direct the same question to you. What drew you to, other than the fact that you wrote this for the Bellatrix series, there are very particular motivations for you for why you wrote this novel and the reason that you have framed it in the way that you have?
So a key aspect of my novel is that it is centered around the experience of two women of color of traveler descent. And Romani travelers originated in northern India, which is where my own family on the maternal side originated. And so I've had a long-standing interest, you know, there's evidence that is part of my cultural history. So I've always been interested in a story that could successfully center that experience at the cost of decentering the way that I live and most people live, which is why I've expressed them as the settled. So they're instantly set up as the outsider. And I think that's such a key thing to do, is to decenter your own experience and to try and empathize with the outsider narrative. And there's been so many interesting, horrifying and insightful things being said about the Black Lives Matter movement at the moment. And one thing that really struck with me was the furore around the tweet that was sent talking about the mainstream. You know, we want to hear from voices outside the mainstream. And then there were all these amazing Black, mainly women writers coming back and saying, we are the mainstream. We've always been here. So it felt, with this book, that's exactly what I'm trying to say, is that you are the center of your own story, and you know, the wider society not accepting that is where a lot of problems can escalate from. So it felt really important to talk about how this has always happened and it continues to happen, and we need to keep telling those stories, and we need to keep complicating the narrative, because I think when we simplify things too much, it becomes very dangerous, because then it becomes black and white, right and wrong. And that's not how true change happens. So in The Deathless Girls, there's very much this muddying of the water about certain good characters do bad things, and bad characters are capable of kindness and of correcting themselves and change. So I suppose I wanted to do something about complexity and to talk about race. And of course, gender is another huge thing in this book, and the way that female bodies are sites of violence, and, you know, and that more tricky aspect of things that draws more directly on my own experiences, and especially mental health, which I know is of great interest to Kat as well, and sort of the impacts of that, and how it can colour a life but not necessarily ruin a life.
Yeah, there's so much going on there. Both novels place real importance on choice as well, for all of your characters. The choices, and it's not, as you're reading both of them, there's a particular phrase, like a mantra even, Kat, that Camille states very early on, and then it's like the bedrock of the battalion, that there is no fate, there's no destiny, and everything is a choice. And I read Dangerous Remedy first, and then I suppose I felt within the Deathless Girls that there was, because Kissy is so certain of who she is and what she wants, that she even takes Lil to task over the fact that, you know, why isn't she pushing back? You know, she's making this choice, and she's seeing her sister make another choice, and she doesn't like it. And I don't think she quite knows what to do with that, because as you said, Lil was her, like, kind of followed her lead in the first instance. So reading both books together certainly impressed upon me, you know, it is about the choices we make, and those also made by others on our behalf. And I felt that was actually really important for all of the characters. And, you know, Kat, maybe what do you feel, if there's any particular character, maybe obviously Camille initially, because she's the cornerstone, and that is her guiding mantra specifically.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's something that was in the forefront of my mind when writing it, hence that mantra kind of came in very early on in probably the first draft of the first few chapters. And it kind of ties in, really it comes to me from what I was talking about earlier, is the whole idea is your sort of the ideals you might hold, and the practicality of making that happen or not, and the fact that we can often feel powerless and sort of trapped in the winds of history, and it's true that as one person you might not be able to, you know, change the world the way you want to, but you can still, you're still able to make individual choices. And it's something I thought about quite a lot when writing, because bringing up mental health being something that both Kiran and I have got an interest in, you know, I have learned a lot about how sometimes the things we do almost don't feel like choices, because of the things that have happened to us, the way we've developed as people. You can get into patterns of behavior that don't feel like choices. And something for me in the process of years of therapy was kind of understanding that both were true at the same time. You had the choice to do one thing or another thing, but you were maybe through experience, your neural pathways want to go that way. So it was something about, for me, it was wanting to kind of say it over and over again and look at it in all the different situations and the places where you don't think you're making a choice but actually you are, or the times when you think you're making a really important choice but actually you're being driven by all these things that happened to you previously. So with Camille, she's very much, I'm making choices, but really she's incredibly driven by the trauma in her past. And for me, that sort of tension was is something that's I think about in myself quite a lot, and so it definitely came out very much, with the political situation in the book, but also with that kind of personal mental health, who we are and why we do stuff question too.
Yeah, absolutely. Kiran, the same question to you.
Yeah, I mean, choice was always going to be a big theme in the book because my ending was already ordained. I had it's a strange thing to write into that space before something, because the ending is set in stone, in paper, and I made that choice early on that I wasn't going to deviate from this path. This was going to be an origin story, and so I had to stay loyal to the original text. And my in the Waterstones edition of the paperback, there's an extra chapter, and in that you actually see Bram Stoker's text overlaid over my own experience, my own story, and the dialogue's suddenly the same, and so you're constricted from the beginning, and so you don't have a choice around the ending. But I did have a choice about how they got there, and it's definitely what Kat was saying about not having a choice, feeling you have a choice is, and actually sometimes choice being a privilege is, I think, something that comes up in this book as well, because if someone has a knife to your throat, or a soldier at their command who could just end your life, and that won't cost them a night's sleep, or you can do what they say and demean yourself and degrade yourself, and so you are being presented a choice, but not really if you want to live. So, and these were the stakes. My book is set around the time of Vlad the Impaler, who was the original inspiration for Dracula. His nickname was Dracul, the dragon, and he did have numerous Romany slaves. So that's where my historical link sort of came in. And it's very difficult when you're within this framework where you are treated as a commodity to actually understand that you do have agency, because that agency is temporarily snatched away from you. So yes, it's very much about that tension of choice, and I suppose that's reflected in the fact I already had my ending, is that it starts and Kizzy is so sure of her fate. That's literally what her belief system hinges on, is that her divining day on her 17th birthday, she will be told what she already knows, because that is written in the stars for her. And Lil shows the doubt, and she's the constant contradiction of that certainty. And it's terrifying to be uncertain, but that's the conditions that most of us exist within, and we are constantly having to make these decisions, and they won't be the same decisions that we would have made a year ago, or will be in a year in the future, and we're collecting our experiences and forming ourselves as we go, and we're ever changing marks. We're not like Kizzy, we're not set in stone. So even though their fate is, I wanted the reader to feel like, I wanted them to see the journey of those choices. And I've definitely had readers disagree with the choices they make, which I've really loved. So if anyone's read it, I'd love to hear if you're one of them. But it felt important for me to be constantly contradicting the idea of choice.
I found that part particularly fascinating. So we're coming up to that moment where we start looking at your questions. We have had a few coming in over the event. Do feel free to pop your question into the Q&A box, and we will be able to come to that one. So, okay, let us have a look. Laura asks, how did you approach interweaving historical research with fantastical invention? Were there any particular challenges that you came across in this process? Kat, would you like to go first?
Well, I've got the obvious thing of Paris. The historical city was just an immediate site where I could bring in all the historical elements just by the day-to-day life that everyone was living, what you're eating, what you're wearing, the way the streets look. And a really interesting thing I found is that the Paris we know today, you can go and visit, is not the Paris of the Revolution. It was basically bulldozed in about 1830, and Haussmann built the Paris that we know. So it was a lot of archaeology to find this old city underneath current Paris and bring that back to life. So that was always a very kind of clear bit of that historical research that came in. But the other big thing for people who've read the book is the science of the period. And that's where the fantastical elements kind of meet up. And it was a big inspiration behind the book, was the science of the Enlightenment of that time, was where our kind of modern scientific method was becoming kind of crystallized and a thing we would recognize today. But also they didn't really know stuff. We were just kind of in some ways coming out of alchemical thinking. So electricity, is a big inspiration behind Frankenstein, which has a lot of influence on Dangerous Remedy. And electricity was something that people did not understand. It was magic. It could have been anything. And the theories about what electricity could be and could do were so fantastical that the idea of historical elements in fantasy just kind of, they were already there. They were already one thing. So in that way, it kind of, it wasn't trying to work it in. It was what the whole book grew out of.
Kiran.
Yeah, I mean, the historical basis for this novel is really the backbone of it, and it's not really until the final third that things start shifting more into fantasy, and that felt really important, that the textures and the language and the smells, I always write very much from my body, and so when I'm writing, I don't really concern myself with details that are outside my character's immediate experience. And especially in first drafts, this can lead to some very thin drafts and some very thin writing, because you really do need that exterior world as well. But I always start very much looking outwards, and then I'll stitch in all the research afterwards. So I read a lot about Romania at this time, and the history of travelers and the culture of travelers, and obviously Vlad the Impaler. I sort of conflate him with Dracula, and so you've constantly got this dance between the historical and the fantasy, and also just the human capability, unfortunately, for horror. Like, you don't really need to reach into the genre in order to find it. So there's that as well, that's sort of overarching or underlaying indeed the whole thing.
You also actually have Romanian in the book as well. There's even like a glossary section.
Yes.
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 Was something you always wanted to have in the book as well?
It felt the most authentic thing to do, and my poor friend who corrected my first draft, she was not impressed in any way, and it was so obviously I just Google translated. And because this is, dancing on that border within fantasy and reality, history and fiction, I did take some liberties with the phrasing of things, because the glossary is there, but I kind of want someone to be able to read it without having to refer to it. I don't want them to have to be interrupting the flow. And I think that's in, if I wrote the book now, I wouldn't even have them in italics. I wouldn't even interrupt the flow of it in order to signal those words as different. There was all that debate around the American dirt, should we italicize something if it's set in that culture? And I believe the answer is no, and that actually I would choose to do that differently. And I hope that the context provides enough explanation without the reader feeling like they don't know where they are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's actually a really interesting decision.
Going forward, I'm just going to trust the reader, but that's not where I was when I wrote the book. You're constantly learning.
No, of course. But at the same time, it's like, it's all down to reader perception. Having a word in italics, how much of a difference does that really make to you as a reader? Does it interrupt or does it educate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's an argument for both, for sure.
Feel free to mention this in the chat or the questions if you have read The Death of Skulls. And if you haven't, let Kiran know. Sorry, Kiran, you're going to get loads of messages on Twitter going, well, I have an opinion about italics. Kat, we have a question for you. I felt really inspired by the insight into you as an author in the acknowledgements, as well as Camille and Ada's story. It's amazing to get a first book contract for a trilogy. Can you tell us a bit about how you became a writer? That's from an anonymous attendee.
Oh, hi, anonymous. Thank you. People haven't read the acknowledgements. I talk a little bit about the fact that I have sadly lost a lot of people in my life, and that became quite a motivation to write, because it's like, well, sorry, I was about to swear then. down, like you're still here, you've got to do something, there's an after to these awful things that happen. So I think that might be where that question comes from. So how did I become an author? Well, I have always written, and it just took until now for somebody to publish something, which is not an unusual story. But it's the only thing I've ever known I wanted to do. I have written for years and years and years, but I have a great knack for getting to the very last chapter of a first draft and going, well, I know how it ends. And then I just close the file and I never open it again. So I have lots of like almost finished books on my desktop. I was like, oh. So really it was about a process of fighting myself to have the commitment to finish something and actually edit it and send it out there. I'd done that with one or two previous books to Dangerous Remedy, but really Dangerous Remedy was the first one that I had the mental capacity to, and the time and the enough of myself spare to do that. It took about 3 years of therapy, and then I was suddenly like, oh, I can do this now. So that's kind of, I mean, I could go into the nitty gritty of like inquiring, that's not what we say, querying agents and things. But really, for me, getting published wasn't a process of like getting rejected over and over again and trying hard for years, because I didn't even get there. I think I read one author talking about this process being when you just reject yourself, you don't even get to the stage of letting a gatekeeper tell you can't be here. You just kind of take yourself out of the running. So that's it. That was it for me. I've always been a writer, and it's taken until now for me to be able for that to be an external thing. And then luckily my agent liked me, and the publisher did too. But that had its own series of woes and difficulties that we don't have time for now.
I mean, we do have a bit of time, you know. We could...
Lots of people didn't like me, and it was really hard to take. But you just have to. That's what publishing is. That's just part of it.
That click, and it's awful like that, especially with your agent, isn't it?
Yes,
that has to be that. It's almost like finding a life partner. It's almost romantic in its chemistry. Like it just has to be like it's either there or it's not.
Yeah, and especially when you're just getting through that first door and you're like, anybody, I just want anybody, and that's not to. I mean, I guess it's that you feel completely overwhelmed with the power is all in someone else's court, and you're just kind of there freaking out, being like, how do I make these decisions? What do I do? This dream is coming true, but it turns out I just can't sleep because I'm stressed. So it's always bad. No, that's not the moral of the story. It's fun. You just have different things to worry about.
It's an ever-evolving journey.
Yes, that's
one journey, like getting an agent and having book published, and then it becomes a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah, now I just move my hair in on my things and it explodes. So that's always new things to discover are difficult.
Kiran, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you got your Girl of Ink and Stars. What was the journey behind that was your debut?
Yes, it was. So I wrote that. So I didn't always know I wanted to be a writer. I didn't only ever want to be a cat, but...
Sorry. You also wanted to be I stopped because you looked very traumatized by the fact I mentioned that. She's like, I put that on my website and now I should remove it. Apparently, Kiran also wanted to be a cat owner and then also wanted to be the first woman on Mars. So there was other things.
That's also true. And I went and I did English at university with drama and education and thought maybe I'll be a teacher. Tried teaching. Oh, that's hard. Oh, it's hard. Did not have
for teachers, especially those back at work.
And thought maybe about doing a law conversion course, and then I had a big mental breakdown and was forced to reassess, you know, my life. I basically had to take a year out of my normal life, went back to live at home, had therapy constantly for about a year, and emerged from that writing poetry. And then I went to university to study poetry, but I did the Oxford course, and you also have to write drama and fiction. And that's where I started writing The Girl of Ink and Stars. My supervisor, Rebecca Abrams, who's a novelist, said, you should finish this and you should send it to an agent. So that's what I did. And that's, you know, there were the rejections, but when I met Helly, my agent, it was that click. I'm obsessed with her and I love her so much. And she has basically helped guide me through my career. And from the beginning, I knew that I always wanted to write any story. So I knew I wanted to be able to write middle grade, which is what Girl is. And then Deaf as Girls is YA, obviously the Mercies is adult. and I've always just wanted to tell stories in as many genres as I can, and so it's really Helly that's sort of steering me through that as I sort of magpie-like, yeah, it's a very appropriate, I'm wearing this, like magpie-like chase ideas and sort of get excited by different things.
Just to follow on from that, it can be quite difficult to describe or even emphasize the importance that an agent has in terms of how important they are to the author and to just the whole process. I wonder if you, I don't know, you don't have the same agent, do you?
Yes, we do.
Oh, you do? I was like, let's all just talk about it. That was a literal mind blown right there.
Yeah, Helly's my agent too.
Oh, congratulations! She's the best. Maybe I did know this, but it's not. Maybe I forgot it. Maybe I knew it, then forgot it. Oh, hooray! Well,
I mean, I was going to say maybe you could talk about the importance of your agent, but then you don't have the same one. I mean, yeah.
Singular agent.
Our agent. But it is, it's like, no, finding out you share a mother. Like, it's extraordinary.
No, it's like agency sisters. Yeah.
What does she do? Well, what are all the things that she does for you? Just to give the audience a bit more of an idea of what an agent does and like how fundamentally important it really is to an author.
Well, she lets me email her really, really stupid questions in a panic and then goes, that's nothing to worry about. And I'm like, okay. Like the things I've emailed going like, is this the end of my career? And she's like, no. And I'm like, okay. So that's one thing to put up with the really, really stressed emails.
Yeah, she's very capable and calm, Helly. She's very, there's no such thing as a stupid question. She's on WhatsApp when she shouldn't be. You know, I'm constantly telling her, like, go and have a weekend. And not all agents are like this. You know, I think we're particularly lucky to have someone who feels as passionately about our writing as we do. And there is no, you know, for better or for worse, there's no off switch really with Helly. She's always there if you need her to be. And she's certainly, as quite aside from like the managerial business side, she's become one of my close friends and a therapist on many an occasion. So I really can't overstate the importance of having a relationship with your agent where you feel able to ask them anything. And I've definitely encountered people who are with agents who make them feel stupid, make them feel like they minimize their issues. And I really would encourage people, I know it's scary to find an agent in the first place to think that you can walk away, but you know what Kat was saying, the power isn't all with them. You've got something they want as well. You've got your stories. So you should be choosy, you should be picky, and you should know what you're worth.
Yeah, I mean, it is a business relationship, but it's probably the place where you need to be able to be honest and vulnerable about what does and doesn't work. So, you know, I think it's making sure it's somebody that you can, if you get edits you hate, that you can say, I hate these edits and I don't understand them, and that you don't have to like present obviously be professional, don't be a terrible human being, but it's somewhere where you can just kind of, I think that's like, because so much of publishing, you have to be professional because it is an industry. Like, we might love books and we might have loads of friends, but it is an industry where you need to maintain professional working relationships with loads of people. So it's so essential to have somebody who's kind of in your corner that you can just go, here's my thoughts, unedited, unfiltered, unprofessional, please help me. And then have somebody who's actually going to not judge you. Well, maybe I'm being too harsh to people who judge you, but do you know what I mean? It's the place where you can be vulnerable, I think, because so much of the time you have to not be, I guess.
Yeah, you have to present this shell of I'm okay.
Yeah.
Well, that was hopefully very informative for our audience. And I love the fact that you were so surprised that Kat.
I'm so sorry, Kat. Like, I must have known it and just forgotten. And so, but it's a lovely thick surprise to relearn it.
So, unfortunately, I feel we are coming to the end of our time together. I hope our audience have enjoyed it as much as the three of us have. It does sometimes feel like it's the three of us just having a chat.
Yeah.
Or something.
What was that? Sorry.
Oh, I was just saying I should have a glass of wine or something, which would be...
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
2 in the
Oh,
afternoon.
no, I felt bad actually drinking my tea because then it's and I've
I
just
just had like an outsized, but as I was drinking this, I was like, this is the wrong bottle to have on.
very large bottle.
I like to be hydrated. What can I say?
Hydration is very important, everyone. So before we have to end our lovely event, do please, if you have enjoyed our authors and you would love to read their books, do please go to the Cymera website, use that as a way to be able to double check the titles or any, because obviously Kiran has a few, and go and have a look. Do support your local independent bookshop. That would be brilliant, because hopefully they will be open again soon, but a lot of them are doing online orders. Blackwell's, sorry, totally forgot Blackwell's name there. Blackwell's in Edinburgh do UK-wide shipping. There's also Hive Book Depository, but do also look up your
I just love
What was
Blackwell.
that? Sorry. Oh, Blackwell's.
Nice.
I have so many book totes. They're just everywhere. Also, just from anything else, don't bookshops. I think. If you have enjoyed our lovely authors and you're in a position to be able to donate a small amount of money, whatever you can afford, to the festival, that money will go to our speakers, because now is a difficult time to publicize and promote a book, specifically a debut, such as Kat finds herself. Just to say, the ebook for Dangerous Remedy is available, though the hardback will be available later this year. And pre-orders are brilliant. So if lovely people would like to pre-order a hardback, it will be very lovely. I may have already seen a similar version. I guarantee you it's do check that out and get those pre-orders in. And then the beauty of a pre-order is maybe you forget you ordered it, and then it turns up in the post and you're like, oh, this is a future gift to me from me. Yeah. Thank you very much, Kat. Thank you very much, Kiran. Thank you, Cymera. Thank you again, Daniel, for your brilliant Brave New Words reading. I have been Eleanor. This has been Kat and Kiran. Thank you for joining us for Past Tensions. I don't know why now I'm sounding like a game show host. But thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy your reading, enjoy the weekend, and I hope you love all the other events that you get to have a look at. Bye.